go. And also, if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll sort of be monitoring that, and then we will have time built into the session for Q&A as well. And yeah, we'll go from there. So over to you, Shannon.
Okay, thank you, Mary, and welcome. I think many of us are acquainted, and we are expecting more than double the number of you who are currently on the call. However, I'd like to get started to just make sure that we respect everyone's time. Thank you so much for gathering with us in a virtual way on our unceded and stolen lands of the Coast Salish, Hulkaminam, and Tsimshian speaking people. And it's a real privilege to be able to bring to you an opportunity for building community here on these lands and waters together. And if at any time you need to go, that's just fine. And also, just so you know, there are some of you who have signed up who are probably seeking to know more about partnerships if you're not with a registered charity. And so I will be going into that in the second half after the Q&A. So we're hoping that I can cover the main details about the how and the what and the who and the why, as well as the Q&A in about 30 to 40 minutes, and that will leave some time for partnerships after, and many of you will be able to go at that point if you're not involved with creating a partnership with a registered charity. Sorry, we're just admitting a lot of other people here, so I want to make sure that I don't need to repeat a lot. I am going to be showing some slides, but not all that many, and when I'm showing the slides, you won't be able to interact with me because I won't actually see the participants at the same time. So if you do have a really, really burning question, please let Mary know in the chat, and Mary can invite you to interrupt me. But hopefully we can go through the main details and then come to the Q&A when everybody will have a chance to speak. And also, I'd like to welcome some of the folks on the call today are actually part of our grants committee, a new committee formed for the Salt Spring Island Opportunities Grants. So thanks to those who have joined who are in that role, and to many of you who are interested in how this works. Here we go. So I'm going to share, so I'm sharing my screen, and now I'm going into slideshow mode. Here we go. Okay. Oh, I can still see you. Oh, great. Okay. All right. I thought I wouldn't see you. So the Salt Spring Island Opportunity Grants have been brought to us by some provincial funds. The Community Prosperity Fund is what they're called provincially. And these funds have been made available as a result of the BC Nonprofit Day, which was just formed in the fall of 2023. And they're rolling out across the province. Some of you may already have visited. There is a portal through the Vancouver Foundation, and some of the communities are running their funds that way. We are running it locally. So we're calling it a different name because they've asked us to do that. So we're going to be calling it the Salt Spring Island Opportunity Grants. It is $150,000, and it is also being used as a bit of a pilot for these kinds of grants that the foundation may be continuing to fund going forward in subsequent years, maybe not every year. So it's a pilot for us. And these grants are really about a quick community-informed approach for poverty relief and social inclusion. So the funding allows us to identify and address our community's needs at a local level and support community organizations where the need is greatest. I'm going to list 4 bullets. This is funding for access to education and training. It is funding for food security for vulnerable individuals and families. It is funding for increased access to housing, health, and economic supports, and investing in social inclusion through charitable activities that advance truth and reconciliation, and which are intended for those experiencing oppression, especially related to race, gender, income, sexual orientation, age, or ability. So it is quite a broad program. The funding can fund either operational expenses or project delivery over 1 year, or if your activities and your intended outcomes will take longer than 1 year to complete, then it could be a multi-year funding request, where longer timeframes are required. So it's not for something in 1 year and the same thing in the next year. It is for something that takes longer than 1 year to complete. Okay, so it is for capacity building or projects. And as I just mentioned, it could be a multi-year initiative. It doesn't have to be a multi-year initiative. I am going to advance the slide, but we can return to any questions about these points at any point. So the question of who does this apply to? So if you are involved and representing a registered charity, you can definitely apply. If you are partnered with a registered charity, you can write the application, but that registered charity must apply. You cannot submit an application unless you are a registered charity. Okay, so we'll go a lot more in depth into partnerships in the second half of this chat. This presentation, this conversation. You are not eligible if you are a nonprofit and you are not with registered status with the Canada Revenue Agency unless you are partnering. And then the partner that is qualified donee under Canada Revenue Agency is eligible, but still the nonprofit is not eligible to apply, only to be in a partnership role. If you're a for-profit business or you represent that, then that's not eligible. If you are a business nonprofit or an association or a chamber of commerce, then you're not eligible. If you are a school or regional health authority or hospital, you're also not eligible. And the local governments are not eligible for these funds because these are provincial funds. So those institutions are all funded provincially already. There's another little ineligibility, and that is if you have previously, sorry, it's not on the slides. If you have previously obtained a BIPOC level grant, which is through the Vancouver Foundation, or a Lighthouse Organizations Fund grant, or a Recovery and Resiliency Fund grant, then you are not eligible to apply for these funds. And that again has to do with just the timing and the source of the funding. So what can be funded through this? What kinds of projects, what kinds of expenses? You can make it a request for your operating plan. This is the first time ever that the Salt Spring Island Foundation has had access to funding that can be for operating uses. And as I said, we are piloting. We do know that there is a need, and we'd like to see what kinds of requests we get. Or you can be making your funding request for direct support or direct programming or direct projects related to poverty relief activities and or improved community social health outcome activities that are registered or that are charitable activities that you're carrying out. So we've got those examples of the buckets that I already mentioned: food sovereignty, operating funds for organizational capacity, anything to do with equity, access, diversity, and inclusion, and broadly education and training. So I'm going to mention a few activity examples now, but I won't mention them all. And we have put a lot on the website. We're also really happy to take your calls and questions here at the office, either by phone or email. And you'll see the email at the end. So activity examples. If you are looking to fund a food sovereignty type of request, perhaps you are an organization working on local food security and you're seeking to expand a food gleaning or redistribution program for at-risk persons, that would be eligible. Here's another example, maybe you're a charity with 3 partnering organizations and you're seeking funds to develop a new food delivery service with income supports for vulnerable people. That kind of partnership is definitely eligible for these funds. Here are some examples of operating funds for organizational capacity. So perhaps you are looking to do simply program delivery, which could include wages, overhead, and administrative costs. And this is program delivery in the area of mental health and addiction recovery, for one example, or maybe it's program delivery to assist those who are insecurely housed and healing from addictions to be able to access housing or health or other economic supports. In the bucket of education and training, some examples would include a health organization that is a registered charity seeking to fund in order to educate and train mental health professionals and peer support workers for advanced service delivery, especially where that is not part of their current system or our operations. Perhaps it's a charity that supports immigrants seeking to support to pay rent and to offer education programs. Perhaps it's a direct service organization seeking to increase job readiness training or to create a new social inclusion program for LGBTQ plus SIA trans equity rights in the community via a curriculum for all ages and sectors. So those are some examples of education and training requests. And a few examples of equity, access, diversity, or inclusion and belonging requests. Maybe you're an Indigenous serving organization seeking funds for language revitalization or an Indigenous knowledge education program, or a BIPOC-led or BIPOC serving initiative that's seeking funds to realize local outcomes in racial equity programs, justice support, and access to services. Or maybe you're doing arts programming, which is arts therapy specifically for vulnerable and at-risk populations. So those are some examples, and we're going to go into eligible expenses next. Oh, just to mention the partnership first. Partnerships, as I already mentioned, need to be an application by a qualified donee, which is the term that Canada Revenue Agency gives to registered charities. And a non-qualified donee is just a negative term that they use to describe other organizations that are registered to be, in other words, they're incorporated and they're probably a society in BC, but they don't have that CRA status with Canada Revenue. They would need to apply in partnership with the registered charity being the applicant. So again, we're going to go into the details of this later. Step number one would be to find a suitable partner if you are not a registered charity and create a memorandum of understanding or a letter of agreement. And I'll tell you some of the things that could be in that letter in the second half. And step two would be a registered charity submits the application. And then as you go through your use of the funds, the charity needs to maintain that financial control over the resources and be the one to report back to the funders. So again, more details coming up about that. I think the next slide is okay, this is a little bit about the application process. Did we miss the eligibility? Okay, I'll just go over the process and then come back to eligible expenses if we've missed a slide on that. So the application process is going to start with an expression of interest form, and I am going to take a moment to just let you know what questions are on that form if you haven't already clicked to open that in our website. And that is due July 22nd. It's sort of a first step. And the person who's making themselves the contact on that form should be an authorized signing representative for the registered charity ideally. And we do ask that question. So if it's not, it might be a follow-up question at the next stage. That would be that the foundation will reply to you between August 12th and 23rd, which is just the week after we are doing the adjudication step. And that will be an invitation to submit full application, or it will be a declined at this round with the reason. And that's to save everyone the time of the full application if we are not able to fund all of the requests. And of course, if it's ineligible, it's to let you know how it could be eligible for another round, another time. And the full application will be invited between September 15th and October 24th. So that's when the portal will close. And the important piece to know is that eligible expenses, if you do receive a grant in this cycle, would only be able to begin in January and beyond. We will be announcing the results in December. So it effectively becomes next calendar year that the use of the expenses or the use of the funds can begin. And again, just a reminder that if you are partnering, you'll probably need to submit that memorandum of understanding, even at the EOI stage, the expression of interest stage, especially if you're a new organization to the foundation, so that we can know a little bit more about your partnership. So I guess I didn't have a slide about expenses. I'll just let you know what some of the eligible and ineligible activities would be. And I'll also share the questions on the expression of interest form. So expenses can begin January 1st, 2025, as I mentioned, and all activities must be completed by June 30th, 2027. The multi-year option is designed for programs that must take place more than 1 year, not those that could just be spread over a couple of years. Eligible expenses include staff salaries and employment-related costs, contractors and fees for professional services, materials and supplies, equipment, travel expenses, training and events, rent, gift cards, honorariums, and administrative costs. I see another person joining the room. We'll just let them in. And ineligible activities would include any activity taking place outside of Salt Spring Island, BC. That doesn't include if you had if part of your expenses were for some professional services and that person was doing the work remotely, that would still be eligible. But if it's an action taking place in community, it has to happen on Salt Spring. Ineligible major capital activities. If everyone can just make sure that they are muted, that would be great. I just hear some background noise. So major capital activities, including building infrastructure, purchasing land or building. So major capital is not eligible for this funding. If it's a political or election related initiative, it's not eligible. If it's generating any profit through the work, including a fundraising event, that's not eligible. Anything that benefits only private interests, any activities that undermine, restrict, or infringe any human rights legally protected in Canada, any sort of sub-granting, so you can't apply for another granting program that you have, and any sponsorship or endowment fund or donation related items are not eligible. So hopefully that just explains what kinds of examples for projects and what the eligibility is. And we'll just take some questions now. Oh, I did want to run through the expression of interest. So I'm just going to back out of my.
If you want, you can bring it up on the screen. I just put the link to the program info page as well in the chat. So if all of the expenses are listed there as well, the eligible expenses, if you want to review those in more detail. And there's also the apply now buttons will open up the expression of interest form. So you can look through the questions as Shannon is going through them if that's helpful.
Yeah, so again, this is just to prepare everyone, and it's very straightforward. That's the whole point of having an expression of interest phase, is so that it's streamlined for folks. It doesn't take a lot of time. First question would be, is your organization a registered charity? If no, then that's going to close down some of the other options here. So hopefully it would be yes, because the applicant should be a registered charity. Is your organization an Indigenous serving organization with qualified donee status? That's the other option. So it's either a registered charity, yes, or an Indigenous serving organization, yes. And then we do want to know if you're partnering and what the partner organization is. So, oh, sorry, just to show you, when you click yes, what comes up next is the name of your organization. And we would like the formal name and also the charitable tax number, and then the contact name. And ideally that person is an authorized signer. And if not, you'll get a chance a little bit later to comment on that. Will you be partnering? Again, if there's a partner organization, this could be the non-qualified organization or the organization that doesn't have registered status. And then you could put in the name and the partner organization charitable tax number if that's applicable, but it looks like it might not be. Oh, and there's a drop down. You would probably put in 0 for that one. And then the organization contact name, again, ideally that's an person authorized to represent the decision makers of that organization. And there's a question about whether this is a funding partner or an action partner. So you might be partnering with someone for funds, and we would like to know that, but we're not going to ask you for a budget at this stage of the expression of interest. Is the partner organization contact listed as an authorized representative? So again, you would say yes. If you said no, then we would love you to tell us why in the box. Then we're looking for the mission or purpose of the primary applicant and the mission or the purpose of the partner. If I had clicked no to the partner organization up here, then I wouldn't have that other box for the partner organization mission. So if it's just your organization, we're just looking for your bylaws, basically your charitable activity purposes at a high level, not a lot of detail, and then also the purpose of your funding request. And if you had clicked yes to the partner, yes, then we would want the bylaws for each organization partnering, because they do need to be aligned, and then the funding request. And then that's the description of the funding request, like the general purpose goal of the activity, but not the details about exactly when or exactly how. And ideally, that's just a few sentences that does really represent. If it's a very complex or complicated type of request, you could submit a supporting document that does explain that a little bit more. And then the dollar number of how much you're requesting, and the answer, if you're going to ask me the question, is there any cap? There's no cap. You could request $150,000. And when will you use it? This is basically, you can't start the expenses until January, but you could also say, well, the project's not actually occurring until 2026. We need that much time to build the partnership with other funds, presumably. And when we want to do it is 2026. You would let us know in this box. If you know exact months, that would be great. If not, then just the general time that it would start and end. And this is just to indicate If you do not have a memorandum of understanding, please let us know that you know that that would be required at the final application stage. And just to make sure again that you have not received any of these other types of funds. And here's a spot for supporting documents. Really, not necessary at this stage, especially if you've received grants from the foundation before, especially if we have seen recent information from you. And if we know nothing about your organization, it would be helpful for us to be able to know some of your charitable activities, a recent financial statement, and ideally that memorandum of understanding if it's a new partnership. And then you can also email or telephone staff to help with this filling out of this form and or even submit all of the question answers by email. We just want to make it low barrier as long as we receive it by July 22nd. So I'm going to just back out of this again and take any questions. Mary can help with.
Yeah, we actually had one, Christine from the library was asking about the recovery and resilience grant from the provincial government. It was a COVID recovery grant. Do you know if that's the same offhand as the recovery and resilience?
That's different.
It's
COVID
different.
Recovery is different. The Recovery and Resilience Fund was, I believe, in 2022, and it was through a federal program that went out through the Vancouver Foundation, collaborating with the Community Foundations of Canada. And we didn't do it directly, but Victoria Foundation did it for our area. So you would have received the grant through the Victoria Foundation if you got one.
Okay, great. So that sounds like you would still be eligible then, Christine. It's different from the COVID recovery grant.
Yeah. Any other questions? I don't see everybody's faces, but happy to take questions as they might come up. Lynn, I do see your face and your hand.
I'm here. There
Hi.
we go. Hi. If we were looking at trying to provide winter camping supplies and clothing for homeless people with the Anglican Church as our registered charity, whose financial statements? Because we're just a few women doing this.
Exactly. So this is the thing. You're never the applicant. In the case of this, you're a partnership, meaning the applicant is the Anglican Church. So it's
Their financial statements.
Yeah, it's their fiduciary responsibility that we're looking at in terms of the risk to providing a grant to an organization. In that case, we have provided grants to the Anglican Church in the past, so we wouldn't necessarily need to see them. And it's more so if it's an organization that is brand new to us.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Hello?
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to know a little bit about the amount you can apply to and the $150,000. Is that the totality of the funds which is coming through the foundation?
So what I can say is that's the totality coming to us from the provincial government.
Okay.
And our organization has actually completed the rest of its granting for the year, except for the Foundation of Youth program. However, our board is interested in possibly putting out a little bit more than that if there's a need that it would. So in other words, it's sort of a discretionary, potentially more, but there's no number involved. I know that's a bit vague. Yeah.
So that's a finite sum, even if the project was, let's say, a 2 or 3 year application or completion period.
Yes, in other words, we're receiving $150,000 that must be spent this way, and our board may see fit to add some of its own discretionary funds, but that's a big unknown until the full application stage. And so a request more than 150,000 is not really recommended, only because it's likely that the board would want to support more than one project rather than, and that being said, there was no, I went many times over it with the board, and the board said, do not provide a cap. So there is not a cap. So if you did have justification for that and you wished to apply for more, you certainly could.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Shannon. I'm wondering about whether you're going to consider different applications from one organization if there's different projects.
Oh, that's a good question. That had not come to mind. I would say probably not, simply because it is 150,000. That will probably see more than one eligible request. But again, there wasn't any specific limitation put to that. So I think if you wanted to put at the EOI stage to put more than one, then that might be a good idea in terms of finding out which ones might be moving on to the next level.
Yeah, whether I would bundle things under an umbrella kind of project or submit two EOIs, that kind of approach.
Mhm.
That
I
might
think-
also be something that we can connect with you to, Yael, before the EOI deadline and try and help you sort out what would be the most suitable project.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're very open to having foundation staff and the chair of this committee involved with a backing and forthing, and or if you wanted to have meetings with other groups and bring us to the meetings or one of us as a representative, we're very open to that. We're looking at it as also piloting more active grant making in the community. Yeah. I see that we still have some, but not a lot of hands going up or questions. Maybe it's time to move on to the partnership details, just so that folks can see how that works. So if you are already involved with a registered charity and you don't expect to be partnering with anyone, please feel free to leave or stay. It's completely up to you. And we look forward to hearing from you when we do. And if you are looking to be involved with partnership, I have about 3 or 4 more slides that just explain that a little bit more in depth. I know that, you know, for example, Arts Council has done partnerships before. There's probably nothing really new here, but it's always good to review it unless you need to go. Okay, so I'm going to move to my next slide. And not that one. Oh, it's interesting. It looks like it may or may not jump into the right spot in the show. Oh yeah, it did. Okay. All right, so partnership. Here we go. So a little bit about this agreement or memorandum of understanding. It is really important that the agreement outlines your charitable purpose or your governing bylaws and also the organization you're partnering with. So as an appendix to that agreement, you could include the document of your bylaws or your governing purposes. It's also important that the agreement itself has a timeline and that it outlines who will do what. So the responsibilities of each party. And it could be a multiple way partnership, but ideally we're looking at anyone that is, any organization that is not a registered charity, that we're showing the role of the registered charity in direction and financial control of the project, and the role of the non-registered organization as the one to carry on the work. And again, just a reminder that the charity must maintain that direction and financial control. And I'll give a little bit more detail from the Canada Revenue Agency on that. And they must make the application. So the contact number 1 needs to be the charity's contact. They also are the ones to report to the funders, which might be interim and or just a final report, depending on how many years your funds are for. And over in the sidebar here, we can see the 5 W's of direction and control. So this is just the terminology. It sounds very paternalistic and patriarchal, but it's the terminology that's in the Income Tax Act. And basically, if you show these 5 W's, then in your agreement, then you're explaining how you are maintaining direction and control. So explaining what's the goal of the partnership, why, who is in the partnership, who will do the activity, who will benefit from it, and who is the one that's maintaining this direction and control. And the what is the actual activity, which might be operating, it might be a program, it might even be a program that already exists, but you would be giving it a when. So you would be giving it the dates for which this partnership is going to be carried out in this way. So the start and end dates. And the where. So as we already mentioned, it must take place on Salt Spring Island, although elements of it, if they involve professional services remotely, could be carried out in other places as long as the beneficiaries of the work are Salt Spring related. Okay, so that's that formal agreement. Yeah, I won't go into more details there, but if you have questions as you're doing it, I do have templates and I also have examples. So this is the part of the Income Tax Act, and if you go to the registered, the Canada Revenue Agency's Charities Directorate, part of their website, you can use this search term, use of an intermediary, to carry out a charity's own activities in Canada. And the link, the direct URL is right in this slide, which Mary, maybe you could pop that in the chat for folks. This is really just me regurgitating this, but it's because I have seen this happening and rolling out, not necessarily as per what the Canada Revenue Agency requires. So they do require that if you use a non-registered charity to carry out the activities that are the source of the funds, or the purpose for which the funds are for, then it must be related to the charity's own activities. It has to be aligned. That's why those bylaws are something that we're asking to see in the agreement and in the expression of interest even. It could be done in one of three ways. Canada Revenue Agency says, says that it could be by basically the non-qualified donee or the non-registered charity acts as a consultant or contractor. And that's the one I'm going to be mainly talking about because that's what applies here. If it's a joint venture, then it's actually several organizations putting their resources together to make something happen. But in the case of what these grants are likely to be about, it would be a registered charity is the applicant, but they're not actually doing the work. It's that the funds would be for the work of another group, and that work has to become like an arm of the registered charity. So essentially, even if it's operating, it's as though they are hiring a consultant to do part of their work. And that's why it really must align. So an example where it wouldn't align might be if there's a service to deliver food to those in need, and they want to partner with a health service society. So not enough of a direct linkage between health services and food provision. Although maybe it's broad enough, and if the bylaws are broad enough, then it could work. But it does really need to be that health services society in that example would be basically taking on the non-registered charity as a contractor to carry out that work, what the funding is for. So here are some tips again about doing this. You want to avoid the penalties that could come about. So that registered charity does risk any financial penalty or revocation of its registration if it becomes a conduit. And a conduit is basically seen under the CRA, under the Income Tax Act, as an organization that is funneling resources to a non-qualified donee. Oh, please apologize. Oh, I apologize for the grammatical error there. Not a qualified done, a qualified donee, which is just, again, the non-registered organization. If they're funneling to that non-registered organization and not checking in and not requiring any paperwork or any follow-up about how the funds are spent, and ideally, they would be spending the funds through a separate expense account rather than just basically granting again. So what they don't want to see is that we as a registered charity would grant to another registered charity that just grants again. So that's not allowed. That's a conduit. And so I just have the little helpful tips here. The fund expenses are carried out as the activities are carried out, and they're not passed through all in one lump at the start without any reporting, because that could be cause for the CRA to come down on the registered charity as a pass-through or acting as a conduit. And the charity's records need to show that it has reviewed the status and activities of that intermediary. So maintain those financial records discreetly and consider that the activities carried out by the intermediary are the charity's own program. So I hope that's really clear. And generally it's what folks understand. I just wanted to go over it so that it was something everyone understands. Here's directly from, there's one example I wrote, just changing things a little bit, and on the left is an example that's on the CRA website. So let's look at an example on the left. A charity has a purpose to promote health by providing psychological counseling services to at-risk youth. None of the staff has training in counseling. The charity locates several professional psychological counselors who will act as the charity's intermediaries. The charity and the counselors create and sign an agreement, and it describes the details of the activity and their respective roles. Then the agreement is that the councils will volunteer their time and make day-to-day operating decisions such as renting offices, notifying the communities of their services, and hiring local support staff. So that's what they're doing with some of the funds intended in this case. The councillors send regular detailed reports to the charity on the use of the charity's resources because it maintains financial control according to the terms of the agreement. The charity then provides ongoing instructions on the use of its resources to make sure the activity continues to be carried on according to the agreement. So there's a backing and forthing, and essentially the one that is applying for the funds is treating this other activity as its own activity carried out by a consultant or another organization. And then I put an example together on the right, based on, again, the using a contractor example. So a charity has a purpose to advance education about social inclusion. As part of its activities, it contracts with a social researcher to conduct targeted research in a set region and to develop educational resources that will advance gender inclusion through 3 distinct educational channels of relevance to that region and no cost to learners. So those are some of the details that make it a charitable activity. The charity and the social researcher draft and sign a contract that outlines all the terms and conditions of their relationship. The contract, oh, I'm sorry, can't touch it. The contract is the instrument through which the charity directs and controls the use of its resources, monitors the use of its resources as the researcher carries out the activity, and makes sure that only fair market value is paid for any work done. So there's a backing and forthing. It's not just passing the funds through and then at the end receiving a sort of a it's done. So it is required if the CRA were to ask for this documentation that the charity could show that it was essentially an arm of its own programming. And here's an example of acting as a conduit, just so you know what that could look like. A registered charity has a purpose to protect the environment, and a nonprofit organization with a similar purpose approaches the charity to partner. The nonprofit asks the charity to accept donations on its behalf, to issue receipts, and then forward the money. The charity agrees. However, the charity has no say on where, when, or how the activities that the money is for gets carried out. The charity is simply funding the nonprofit's activity. Therefore, even though the activity might be charitable, even though it might even be aligned, the charity then is acting as a conduit. To avoid acting as a conduit, the charity must be able to show through its books and records control over the use of its money and that it's carrying on its activities itself through its intermediary. And that concludes the details about the partnerships, but I hope some of you have some questions about this, especially if you are new to partnerships. Any more questions? We're down to not as many people in the call. Is there anyone who's looking to do a partnership who hasn't done one before, who might want to let me know about that? Because we could follow up outside of this more public format if you'd like to talk that way. Lynn?
I did do one I don't know how many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago with Quayside through iWay for exactly the same thing, these winter clothing and everything. And so, but she was very, very knowledgeable about all of this. So she was able to, construct the memorandum of understanding and all of that. She's offered to give me a hand this time, even though she's in in Victoria now, but I don't believe there's anyone at the Anglican Church at this point in time who has any experience with this whatsoever.
Well, there is, is it Clark Saunders? He applied recently, and I believe he's at the Anglican Church. And
I think he's at the United Church.
oh, I might be wrong.
Clark is United. Yep.
Yeah, he's at the United Church. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can certainly help you, Lynn. So we have the templates for the type of agreement, and we can share those with you. And we could sit down and have a meeting with yourself and the Anglican Church to make sure that we're giving you the help that you need.
We have some steps to go through before we get there, but yeah, I just want to make sure that the CRD isn't going to end up taking everything and disposing of it after we've gone to all this trouble to take these funds and try and utilize them. So that's an important step that I'm going to need to get some agreement on before I do anything.
It does sound like that would be a good idea to put into your agreement in your case, which might mean some pre-conversations with the CRD about
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions about partnerships or anything else about the process, how it works and the timing? So Mary is our communications manager. She's also helping with some extra grants administration on this, this funding cycle. And so if folks do have questions, they can contact Mary or myself, or they can just call the office or contact Rebecca, who is our administrator. Alicia, did you have a question? See, you just popped back up. Okay.
I just thought it would be nice to pop in and pay attention here at the end.
Nice. I'll put both of our emails in the chat as well, just so you have them. And again, like we're around to answer any questions by phone or email, or also meet with you one-on-one if you want to talk through your project and get more clarity around it before submitting the EOI.
There is 1 week in July when both Mary and I will be away. So that is just to recommend that you don't sort of leave everything to that week. That is the week of the 7th to the 14th or 8th to the 15th. So I'm back the 15th. But if you can get in touch with us before July 8th and or the week that I'm back, the 15th, it's just fine. Kajan, did you have anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, I've been talking to the Farmland Trust about partnering up them as the charitable status organization. I know that Polly couldn't make it to this meeting today, but I did see that you guys are recording it. So I'm wondering if those recordings will be shared, if there's a way I could pass that on to some members of my team or the grant writing team at a later date. So that'd be really useful.
Absolutely, Kajin. I'll likely just give it some time. It takes a bit of time to process, and then I'll send an email out to everyone who registered with the link to the recording, so you can check it out and send it around.
Talking about it
Okay.
in the community and folks didn't know about this session, please let them know there is a recording and they just need to contact us. And or just have a
Okay,
phone call with
excellent.
us and we can give them a rundown. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, it doesn't seem like we have any more questions, but I don't want to rush anything. So we've come to our close for today. And again, it was just really lovely to have all of you, and please help us to spread the word about these opportunity grants from the community prosperity funding through the province. And if you do have questions, we look forward to following up with you. July 22nd is the deadline for the expression of interest, and then there will be a response back about doing the full application.
And also, there on the link to the program page, there is more or less all the info we covered today, minus a few slides about the partnership. There's also a downloadable PDF guide version of the same information that also has a rough rubric of how we'll be evaluating applications that might also be useful to help shape your project idea as you're going through the EOI.
All right,
Okay.
well, with that, we will do a little closing, no big fanfare, but we hope to see all of you really soon, and best of luck.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you very
everyone for
much.
coming.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.